Well, hello there. You're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the Daily Mirror's associate editor, Kevin Maguire, and the Daily Mail columnist, Sarah Vine. Welcome to both of you. Yes, not hard to guess tonight, is it? Let's have a look at the front pages then. Let's start with the Financial Times. The headline, Hunt defies the gloom with an upbeat budget. The Metro calls today's announcements an easy-does-it budget. The Express is in an upbeat mood too, declaring we'll make this work for Britain. The news that fuel duty is to stay frozen sparks this headline in The Sun, tanks a lot. The Guardian's verdict more damning. They describe it as a giveaway for the 1%. Likewise, The Mirror, the headline there, pots for the rich. The Eye says that what we've seen is actually a 4 pence in the pound income tax rise by stealth. On the same theme, The Times says we now have the biggest tax burden since the war. The Telegraph leads with the problems at Credit Suisse, which it says are stoking fears of a new global banking crisis. And on a completely different note, The Star has the tall story of a 6'4" jockey who'll be taking part in the racing at Cheltenham tomorrow. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch the programme. So let's head then to Kevin Maguire and Sarah Vine. So let's do the FT first of all, shall we? Although I think they might have updated their paper with Credit Suisse, but we'll come to that later. Hunt defies the gloom with an upbeat budget. Certainly better news on the prospect of recession and indeed on inflation today, Sarah.
Yes, so technically we're not going to go into recession this year, and they're predicting that the inflation will be at 2.9% by the end of the year. It's interesting, the evolution of the budget during the course of the day, because I think at the beginning it was quite well received. And then, of course, throughout the day, the various sort of partisan papers have sort of solidified their views and taken much more polarised points of view. So the FT, I think, is still quite a good measure of this budget, which is sort of, I'd say, a curate's egg, good in parts. You know, it's not as bad as it could have been. It's certainly much better than Kwasi Kwarteng's budget. And I think Hunt delivered it well. I think he seemed quite confident. I'm surprised no one's made a joke about all the E he's clearly been taken with his 3 E's. But there we go, the headline writers haven't been doing that today. So we'll see. I think the Credit Suisse story will start to come up now during the course of the night.
Yes, 4 E's if you include the everywhere, which was levelling up, of course.
E's, yes.
Yeah. Anyway, the Daily Express as well will make this work for Britain, the spring budget special, you know, all sorts of pages and pages on all of this. Before we get to the detail and some of the criticism we see in the papers, your take, Kevin.
Yeah, I think all those E's, I think there's no ecstasy about this budget anywhere. I quite like that pun for the Express, probably the most loyal paper in Old Fleet Street, supportive of the UK Conservative government. But I like it. We'll make this work for Britain when Hunt was talking about work, and you can apply that to the entire budget. I thought, unlike Sarah, I thought his delivery was very flat and somewhat dull, monotone. But I think the reason the budget's fallen apart or doesn't look as shiny tonight as it did at the time is, of course, it's a very political speech by a chancellor. It was well briefed in advance with press releases and so on. And he wants to show, as any chancellor would, Labour want to, in the best possible light. But then when you get under the bonnet of the figures and you look at them, they aren't quite as rosy. Because yes, there'll be no recession, but the economy will still shrink. An economy that's still the only G7 major economy, smaller than it was at the time of COVID. And then you go through, is there enough money for childcare? Because it looks a great policy in principle, but will it actually work? How long will it take to come in? And then you look at those stealth tax rises. We'll see some of the other papers, income tax, because the bands won't go up, 29 billion he'll take. There's going to be a huge row around pensions for the wealthiest now, 1 billion. Labour's planning to vote against them. The House of Commons trying to turn it into a 45p tax row that we saw with the Kwasi Kwarteng, Liz Truss, Tory kamikaze budget. So I think that's why it's not as shiny as it was, because it was well briefed, all the nice bits, but the worst bits weren't, and some of them are pretty grim for households. And I think Hunt being so smug and upbeat, I think that will jar with many families who are still suffering and know they will continue to suffer for some time.
Yes, just on the Metro and the Ease, they certainly pick up on that. Easy does it as their front page headline, and the Ease were enterprise, education, employment, and obviously everywhere, as we mentioned. But let's go to The Guardian then, shall we? The giveaway for the 1%, Labour's take on this. Pension change in Hunt budget puts the wealthiest in line for enormous tax cuts. You know, they said this was specifically about senior doctors and consultants, even senior head teachers, some suggested, if they've worked for long enough, that they're butting into their lifetime allowance because they've got fixed pension contributions, and it's driving people from the market at a time when the NHS needs those people in place. Is that enough of a justification, do you think, Sarah, for this policy right now in the middle of a cost of living crisis?
I think given the trouble that the NHS is experiencing, we've got all these strikes today with these junior doctors, and some of the reporting around that is quite interesting because they seem to be. One of them was talking about how much fun they were having making all their patients go to A&E and causing the maximum disruption. I think it's a bold move, but I think it's necessary. They've got to keep these consultants in work. I mean, I'm surprised with The Guardian being such a kind of beacon of feminism hasn't gone on the childcare policy, which I think is actually quite progressive and actually long overdue. The idea that most women actually basically pay just to be able to stay in the workplace so that they don't drop out is an outrage that's existed in this country for many years. And the idea now that that's going to eventually end, you're going to be able to get childcare from the age of 9 months of your child, which will enable women to go back to work without being penalised, which is what's always happened. But obviously, that doesn't suit The Guardian's narrative, so they're leading on the 1%.
Well, I suppose they broke the story yesterday, though, didn't they? I mean, Kevin, the idea was possibly that was going to be the rabbit, and The Guardian got it. Is that what happened?
Yeah, well, it looks like it's got a bit of mixomatosis today when people are doing the numbers on childcare. I think Sarah's been a little bit harsh there because the childcare was well briefed in advance. There'd been so much coverage on TV, radio, the net, papers, including The Guardian. And I think this is they've gone for the story now because the abolition of the lifetime limit on pensions was not briefed out. There were figures around 1.5 million, 1.8 million, but there was no abolition. And while the FT and the Express, which we've discussed, I think the government will be quite happy with those front pages, it won't like this one, because it's in the cost of living crisis, giving a large amount of money, £1 billion, to a small number of people. And Labour have crunched the figures from official sources, claiming for each person who gets back into the workforce, it'll cost £75,000. There is an alternative, of course. A scheme could have been done specifically for the NHS. There was a special scheme for judges, for instance, in the public sector to stop them all going off and being barristers and getting more money. Footballers also have their own scheme that can get their pensions, access them earlier. So there are probably other provisions, and Labour's going to make a big ballyhoo with this. As I said, they're going to now vote against it, and try and turn it into a new 45p tax rate. I'm not quite sure it'll be that successful, because that was against the backdrop of a lot of other tax changes in the budget. That percent of pound plummeting required a bailout rescue of the pension funds and had to be reversed. But there's no doubt.
Well, just to clarify,
Hunters taken a risk here, and it may backfire on them.
So they'll oppose it, Labour has said, and then what is the idea that they'll reverse it? Is that what might happen? And if so, how does anybody plan for their pensions, given we've got a general election next year?
Yeah, well, you're quite right. That's a question they will have to face. If they're going to oppose it now and say it shouldn't happen, what happens if it does happen? What do they go into the next general election saying they're going to do? Would they just freeze it? Would they penalise anybody who had money over? I think those are questions that will have to be asked and require answers.
Well, there was one comment on social media I saw today. It's not about doctors. It's about the income bracket that pays the vast majority of income tax in this country. So it's clearly broader than consultants, isn't it? But just looking at the idea of getting people back to work, be it childcare, be it the pension pots, be it returnships, whatever it might be. the OBR suggesting that will only actually encourage 110,000 people into work when we have 7 million economically inactive people in this country. It's a lot of money, Sarah, as a giveaway today to encourage this returnship for 110,000 people.
Well, I mean, we don't know if that's the case, do we? I mean, that's what the OBR are saying, but they could be wrong. I can't, I don't understand enough about economics to know whether or not it's a total waste of money. But it seems to me that the general direction of travel, which is to encourage people to go back to work, and particularly people who have a lot of really important skills like doctors, etc., it seems to me a good political principle. I mean, I just don't see why you would really object to that.
Well, a political
what's going to power the economy, and the reason why there's going to be no recession, not what the government is spending. It is two reasons. One is the steeper than expected fall in international energy prices after the Putin's invasion of Ukraine, and secondly, higher immigration into Britain.
Well, indeed, but that's the point, isn't it? All of this money spent on returning, people with mental health issues in this country, or those on long-term sick, possibly with long COVID, an effort to get them all back to work, because Jeremy Hunt, Sarah, won't press the lever to give visas in specific sectors for foreign workers to come to this country.
Well, I mean, that is a much bigger political question, and I think that they probably should think about doing that. Definitely, I don't really understand what the big obstacle is. It seems to me that you can do that fairly successfully and in a fairly orderly fashion, and maybe they will do that.
Anna, I philosophically agree with Sarah that if you can work, you should work. We shouldn't give up on people. We should help them get into work if there are barriers, either medically disabled or mentally problems or childcare or need reskilling, whatever it is. We should do that. But rather a large number of people since COVID have decided that they prefer not to work, and if they're not on benefits and they can support themselves, I'm afraid you're not going to get them back in. They just think, right, I'll have a bit of less cash, but I'll have more leisure time.
The Mirror also going on this, pots for the rich, talking about the pension pot and that lifetime allowance, also saying nothing for public sector workers who are striking outside. And, we heard Jeremy Hunt there say that the strife is caused by inflation, but saw inflation falling. I've always wondered if delaying any pay settlement as inflation falls helps the government out, Sarah.
Yes, I think you're right on that. I think that's what they're banking on, as so to speak, which is that the inflation will come right down, and then wages will not seem so devalued. It seems to me a perfectly sensible strategy.
The Sun tanks a lot, picking up on what they say is their Keep It Down crusade about freezing fuel duty. Some people questioning whether this policy, which actually costs more than the £5 billion offered to defence in the next year, is the right way round. But the whole point is we're in an energy cost crisis, aren't we, Kevin?
Yes, although it's a very marginal impact on inflation. It's not really falling because of what the government is doing. Again, it went up for reasons, international reasons, and it'll come down for them as well. But it was Paul Johnson, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, pointing out this will cost £6 billion. And is that a good expenditure of £6 billion? Well, that would quite easily resolve almost all the public service key worker strikes that we're seeing now. But there's some campaign on it. Hunt has gone for it, although it's worth pointing out the Social Market Foundation, a centre-right think tank, on Monday had a report that's showing actual fuel duty freezes and cuts. The vast majority of that goes to wealthier households because they have bigger cars, bigger engines, sometimes two cars. So it's not really white van man who benefits or families that are struggling. It is better off people. OK,
that's interesting. And Jeremy Hunt's commented on that, asked whether he was right to increase the pension pot, and said, it's right to keep those experienced workers in the market. As they are older, they will be paid more. But 5 times more money has gone to younger parents in this budget than to that pension pot. Sarah, I interrupted you.
No, I just wanted to say the other thing. The one thing I do think that is slightly worrying is that they haven't extended this fuel help to businesses, to small businesses. And of course, so I think swimming pools get some help with heating the pools, but generally, small businesses are not getting any help with energy costs, which are really crippling them. And I do think that is a bit of a missed trick for him there, because I think traditionally, small businesses have always been important to the Conservative Party base, and that would have been something I would have looked at.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, and the swimming pool announcement got a bit of a chuckle in the Commons, did it not, after news of Rishi Sunak, anyway, in his constituency. Anyway, lots more still to come. A big day of news elsewhere too. On any other day, a collapse of shares for one of Europe's biggest banks would have been a much bigger story. We will be talking about the fears about Credit Suisse when we come back. Well, welcome back. You are watching the press preview with me once again, Kevin Maguire and Sarah Vine. Kevin, let's go to the Daily Telegraph, another version of the FT, also leading on this, the concerns about Swiss Bank, with the Telegraph suggesting there are emergency meetings tonight with the Bank of England and its international counterparts on this.
No, absolutely. This is hugely important. It's the 17th largest bank in Europe, has a real role in setting rates, made 6.6 billion losses. Saudi National Bank, so they couldn't give it any more cash because it's regulated to 10%. And the FTSE 100, the share stock exchange in the UK, is something like £75 billion knocked off this, because it reverberates around the world, and there are just fears of another banking collapse. We saw the Silicon Valley Bank go under, rescued in Britain by HSBC, which Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, says won't cost taxpayers anything. But no, this is worrying, and it can be a contagion that can spread. Everybody will be trying to calm the markets and investors, speculators, but of course, everyone will also be looking over their shoulders. And we all think back to what happened in 2007, 2008. Now, this is probably not comparable to that, but nevertheless, it revives very, very bad memories.
Yes, sorry to interrupt you. The Swiss National Bank has come out tonight and said it would provide Credit Suisse with liquidity if necessary. Credit Suisse said it welcomed that statement of support. The Swiss banking regulator also suggesting tonight that Credit Suisse meets the capital and liquidity requirements for big banks. And this is a whopper, isn't it? Second biggest bank in Switzerland, which is known for its banking sector, Sarah.
Yes, I mean, I think it is a whopper. You're completely right, because Credit Suisse is considered by many to be the absolute gold standard of banks. It's and also it's Switzerland. It's meant to be boring and safe and efficient with money, and so the idea that Credit Suisse is in trouble is really frightening, because then you think, well, if that's the top of the tree, then where's everybody else? So, and I think people think, quite rightly, we've only just we've very just recovered from paying off the last lot of bankers who made a gigantic mess of the world by investing in lots of terrible, poor investments that didn't work. And what are we going to have to do it all over again? I mean, no wonder people are hiding underneath their duvets. I mean, it does seem and 2008 for me doesn't feel like that long ago. I mean, I remember living through it, and it was horrendous and very frightening. And we've only just got out of COVID. I mean, I just don't know that we can take another big mistake.
Yes, and the second national version of the Financial Times has the falls in the banking sector on stock markets today. Some really big drops. Credit Suisse alone down 24 points. And as many people point out, how many times does socialism have to bail out capitalism? That's sort of, what we've seen, isn't it? Yeah. Kevin, just a very quick word on that. I haven't done the other stories. Apologies. Carry on.
Yeah, private profits, public losses. It's an old story. Saw it in the energy sector here. It's why I favour much more widespread public ownership of parts of the finance industry: gas, electricity, water, rail, mail. Could go on, I'm sure.
I think I let you get away with that one. I didn't get to the 6 foot something jockey in the Star, but here we are. Kevin and Sarah, thank you both very much indeed. We will see you for more at 11. Right.